writing is so private, like you're sitting there alone at your desk just working by yourself. But like being a writer in this day and age, like it's very public. Like you're expected to be kind of like out there and talking about your work and being really kind of eloquent and being able to kind of sell yourself, which I think it's very strange, and I think it's very new.
Hi, I'm Olivia Cummings, and on this podcast, I'd like to introduce you to the people who inspire me in my life and work as a jeweler, designer, and the founder of Cleopatra's Bling. Have you ever been caught in a lie? Maybe just a small one, born out of a misunderstanding, never intended to be told. But one lie leads to another. It's easier to go along with it than to explain the whole truth, you tell yourself. That's exactly where the protagonist of Dominic Amarena's debut novel, I Want Everything, finds himself. What follows is a sharp, fast-paced literary mystery, written with incredible panache. It rollicks forward at breakneck speed without losing its intelligence or style. You might even catch yourself holding your breath by the final chapters. Dom is a masterful storyteller. We talked about truth and lies, wild years abroad, plot twists, and just what length someone will go to when they're desperate, ambitious, and out of options. Cleopatra's Bling acknowledges the Wurundjeri people as the traditional custodians of the country where we work and their continuing connections to land, waters, and culture. We pay our respects to their elders and all Kulin Nations people, past, present, and future. The conceit of I Want Everything is a great literary mystery being uncovered. The identity of a reclusive cult author who the protagonist stumbles across early in the book. What are some of your favourite real-life literary or artistic mysteries, and have they been solved?
That's a really good question. And I think this idea of like mystery plots are really useful to structure a book. And I like kind of using this mystery plot as a way to kind of answer questions about like Australian history, identity, and the kind of stories we tell. Because, I kind of think like people are like mysteries in themselves. So I think this kind of plot can be really helpful to kind of like uncover secrets about people. And I think Australia in particular has this really interesting relationship with like mysteries, hoaxes, scandals. And I think my novel's kind of like really in conversation with this. And so just to pick a couple of examples, recently you might have heard of like the scandal involving John Hughes, who was this kind of like very literary writer in Australia. I think this is about 3 years ago now. And he wrote this kind of very serious book called The Dogs about war in Europe, and like it was very dark, it was very literary. Everybody thought it was going to win the Miles Franklin, which is like Australia's biggest literary prize. And then it was revealed he'd stolen all of this kind of material verbatim from like a Nobel Prize winning author, Svetlana Alexievich, who's a wonderful writer in her own right. And basically his whole book had been kind of plagiarized from other people. And it was kind of withdrawn in disgrace, and it was this huge scandal. And the thing that I found really interesting about it is like, this wasn't like a one-off. This has been happening in Australia for like kind of like 100 years. Like our literary history is like really bound up in this idea of like hoaxes, scandals, and kind of like people being unmasked and uncovered. Like during the 90s, there were all these scandals when white writers were kind of like pretending to be Indigenous Australians, pretending to be immigrants, and kind of creating their careers on like the backs of marginalized communities, which said something about kind of Australian identity, which I think is really fascinating. And so, I don't know, I think my book kind of was involved with trying to kind of think about why that might be and what's so Australian about this idea of the scandal and the hoax and the mystery. And I don't know, I think there's something about this symbol of like the fraud and the fake that's very Australian. Maybe it's something to do with like white settlers. We're living on stolen land, and maybe we feel like there's a sense of unbelonging. And so I think it kind of infuses into the literary culture where there's a lot of like fakery, there's fraudulence, there's deception. And I think we also like to see these people unmasked. Like there's something cathartic about that, to kind of see these people's lies be revealed. So I think that my book is kind of like playing with that a bit, I guess, or it's investigating that. So I think this idea of like scandals and hoaxes and lies and deception was really kind of like a theme which ran all the way through the book.
Interesting. I've got so many follow-up questions that would mean we go way over time, but I've noticed that in my industry as well, a lot of a lack of confidence in one's ability to be able to go out on a limb and create something completely theirs. But that's like, obviously I can't speak to your example or all of the above, but I think that's something that I've always thought about Australian culture.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, and so there's like there's obviously, there's the term cultural cringe, where there's like this feeling of like Australian art being kind of inferior to like the art from Europe. Yeah, we're kind of taught to feel that, I think, from a young age, and it's hard to kind of break out of that, I think. But it really does like infect the way we see ourselves on kind of a national stage, I think, and that can kind of influence these scandals as well, where we're kind of copying from Europe and pretending that we're like, it's our own work or something like that. But yeah, I totally know what you mean. There's this fear of putting one's work out and kind of like being daring, I suppose.
I mean, it makes me feel sad for the people that feel like that, but it seems like it's rife also in the writer's world, which I wasn't aware of. So the book starts with the main character having just completed a medical trial for money. In my 20s, I heard of broke friends putting their bodies on the line for cash, but it's something that also seems incredibly risky. Do you write this from experience?
Well, I think all books are kind of written from experience of the writer, whether they're kind of sci-fi or whether they're realist. Like they're all drawn like in part from like what we go through throughout our lives. And I've been really interested in the way that my book has been read quite autobiographically by a lot of people. So like, the book is the protagonist of my book. He's a bit of a shit. He kind of enacts this big deception. He does something which is kind of like pretty morally suspect and kind of like tricks the story of this cult author out of her through deception and lies and et cetera, et cetera. And very interestingly, I had a lot of people being like, oh, did this happen to you? Did you do this? And I'm like, well, no, I didn't. Like this is just fiction. Like I didn't, deceive an old woman to kind of, get my novel out there. So I think it's just the way that like people read books. Like we're interested in the author and we want to kind of see them in the text. And, my book, my narrator doesn't have a name. He's roughly the same age as me. He lives in Melbourne, which is a city I lived in for a very long time. So there are biographical similarities, but I think there's kind of like it's always through a lens, or it's always abstracted a little bit. But the medical trials that you brought up, that is actually true. So that was probably the one aspect of the book which is really autobiographical and really true to life. Like throughout my 20s, when I was quite strapped for cash, I did medical trials. So, I'd kind of go into the hospital and I'd kind of live there for weeks at a time, and I'd have these drugs tested on me and they'd take my blood and all of that stuff. It was very boring. It was very kind of like grueling. It wasn't like my finest hour, I suppose. But, in hindsight, I think, I'd get this check at the end of it, and it was a way, like being a kind of lab rat gave me time and space to write. I had like a little, I had more freedom than perhaps like I would have had if I'd had to, work a job. And it was a way for me to kind of like prioritize writing. And so in hindsight, it kind of was helpful. But, now I look back on it and it really symbolizes this kind of precarity and the turmoil of my 20s. And it makes me kind of really appreciate perhaps the stability that, I have now. And it was really fun to kind of like go back to this really uncertain period in my life and kind of like put it back through the novel and play with it and kind of make it into something quite fun and funny. And it was actually quite cathartic. But yes, the medical trials, I'm glad they're over. But yes, that was one of the many strange ways that I tried to make a living during my 20s.
I think everyone's 20s are a bit ad hoc like that.
Yeah.
I never did a medical trial myself, but I think I knew people that did, that invited me to them.
Yeah. Everybody was doing them. It wasn't just me, thankfully.
Oh no, it was common actually. I don't hear of them anymore though.
I think they're still around, but maybe it's for the youngsters.
Bit more regulated now, maybe slightly.
Yeah,
or
yeah,
maybe not.
Yes, yeah. I don't know.
So gossip, rumours and interpersonal relationship drama can become the currency of any literary or artistic community. That's something that I personally find can be quite detrimental in the long run to creativity and productivity. In I Want Everything, the main character is driven by his desire for success within the insider literary community. What has been your relationship to the niche and sometimes gossipy nature of these so-called creative circles?
I think you put that really well. Being an artist is like really hard in any country, because I think there's never enough to go around. There's not enough money, there's not enough attention, there's not enough readers. And, it can really feel like artistic success, anybody's success. It's like a zero-sum game that, if you see somebody achieving something, it's taken from somebody else. And it's really hard not to feel that way. It's sort of hard. It's almost impossible not to kind of see success and feel like the success should be going to someone else, or it should be going to you, or whatever. It's like, I don't know, making art, I think, is like a really beautiful way to spend one's life. And it's like, it's important to kind of like think about that, because rather than kind of feeling resentful about people's, usually relatively minor successes, because I don't know, writing writing a book takes like such a long time, and it's really hard for that effort to go noticed, because it is like a pretty grueling process. And I feel really lucky that my book has received some attention already, because I know it's like really easy to kind of disappear. But I don't know, artistic community, it's like so crucial to kind of, I think, maintaining any sort of sustainable career. You need people you can trust, who can give you encouragement, but they can also tell you when like your work isn't working, and they can give you that kind of like criticism that you need to kind of make your work better. But I don't know, I agree that I think that sometimes artistic communities, they can, it can turn to a bubble, it can be an echo chamber, there can be like gossip, intrigue, and that can be fun, that can be really fun, but I think it can sometimes like get in the way of like making art. You can start focusing on who's getting what, whether they deserve it or not, and I don't know, I think that can be really crippling. And I think instead of focusing on like the hype, and instead of focusing on other people's work, it's like really helpful to just kind of concentrate on making work that you find interesting yourself. And I think like moving away from Australia, like having a bit of distance from a scene has actually been really helpful for kind of making work, because you don't feel quite as like entangled in everybody else's business. I don't know if you had a similar experience when you were kind of like.
I definitely find the scene in Australia, and obviously like my niche would more be fashion, which I think is even just because of where jewellery falls. But I don't relate to the fashion industry as much as I do to the actual crafting, which I find more exciting than the fashion industry.
Yeah.
So I don't really get that involved in the glossy side of it, really. I really enjoy the nerdy sort of research and product development. I also find that it's quite cliquey. I just don't really believe in competition that much. Like, I just think if somebody's going to buy my jewellery, they're going to regardless of other brands because they like it. So I don't have a feeling of competition towards other labels, but I think I'm pretty alone in that. I think a lot of people do just see each other as competition. So I just try not to really subscribe to that mentality or follow other brands, really. Like, I admire other brands and designers and things, but I'm not like aspiring to be them, because I sort of just enjoy making what I make. And I also just struggle with like the labeling, I think, of like how people call people, creatives, because I just think it's such a, I don't know, it's like a fixed term,
Yeah.
As a noun, it's just like, I am a creative. And it's like, it's sort of more divisive than it is something that can develop or grow or change or evolve. So I always, when people say like to me, you're a creative, it sits funny with me for some reason. Because I feel like I'm like, everyone's creative, I think. And I know people say they're like, no, I'm not creative. I'm like, you absolutely are, just not because you're making jewelry. You have your own creativity. Like, it could be cooking, it could be gardening, there's so many ways that people are creative. So I just find all that stuff a bit weird to me. And I think that's why I try to stick away from the groups of so-called creatives, because I think I don't know, I just noticed that a little bit in Australia. It's very labelled. So you're in the sports industry, you're in the advertising, you're in jewellery, or you're a creative. So that stuff I find a bit jarring personally.
Yeah, I agree. I find those labels like very limiting. And I think what you said there was it's a really good ethos to like make work by, which is to like just concentrate on your own work and like make the work that you find interesting, rather than kind of like looking at what other people are doing. And kind of like, and if you kind of really like the work that you're making, I agree, you start appreciating other people's work more.
That's just such a product of capitalism, which is, I think, the antithesis of creativity. So I'm like, well, are you a creative then if you just want to bring everyone else down who is in the same industry as you? I don't know. Like, I just think like I'm really happy I've got this friend who lives in Jaipur, and he's a stone sorcerer, and we both made some stone rings because it's a technique of Jaipur. And then there were some trolls on Instagram tagging him saying she's copied you, and I'm like, we're actually friends, like we WhatsApp about stones and stuff. So he was just like, okay, I don't know what they're talking about, but just there's that whole rivalry mentality.
Yeah.
And obviously, like I do think there is such thing as copying and plagiarism, but if people are just sort of drawing on similar techniques, or, you know, I don't think that that's copying. Like, I'm not original in what I do. Like, what I do is I make jewelry that people appreciate for whatever reason, but I haven't invented the wheel by creating what I create. And it's like, so I feel like unless someone literally replicates what I'm doing, then it's not plagiarism. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's just, you know, being inspired by the same or similar mythology or certain, you know, cross-cultural, you know, jewellery techniques. I'm not the only one who has access to that, I suppose, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. Well, there's a nice line. It's like, if you kind of copy from one person, it's plagiarism. But if you copy from 100 people, it's like genius or something, because it's like, I don't know. I think you should be like, we should all be really honest about like the things that kind of inspire our work and kind of infuse our work with kind of like meaning. And I think it is, it's wrong, and it kind of like doesn't make sense to kind of, you know, pretend that your work comes from nothing, or it just comes from you. It comes from the world. It comes from like everything you've interacted with.
Completely. I may look at something and not even realize that it's been stored in my brain somewhere.
Yeah.
So the protagonist in the book finds himself caught in a self-serving web of lies that becomes more and more tangled as the novel progresses. How important do you think honesty is as a value in this era that we're living in currently? And through what life experiences did you come to that conclusion?
Interesting. Yeah, I think that is a really interesting question, because I think you've hit on something which is kind of a crucial theme of this book, which is, I'm really interested in this idea of kind of authenticity and honesty as kind of concepts, and almost as like commodities, and the way that they're kind of used and traded, and what they reveal about kind of like the idea of authorship, what we kind of expect from our authors. I think these are kind of really interesting questions, especially today, as you said. And I think my novel kind of sets up this contrast between like two, shall we say, like types of artists, who's like the protagonist, who, as you said, he's kind of lying, he's deceiving this woman. All he wants to do is like achieve fame and notoriety. And, you know, the book is just a kind of means for him to like get that. And then against that, there is this kind of reclusive cult author who's called Brenda Shales in the novel, who you know, she wrote these kind of cult books in the 70s, and she kind of mysteriously disappeared. And basically my protagonist is like trying to uncover this mystery. And you know, I think this figure of the reclusive artist is really interesting, because they refuse this thing that, you know, is kind of the coin of the realm of, I think, like, you know, kind of modern society, especially on the internet, which is attention. They refuse to kind of like accept the attention that their work kind of brings. And I think that kind of drives people a bit crazy because like, you know, people want attention and then people who could get attention are refusing it. And it makes people kind of like, I don't know, makes them do crazy things, makes them really resentful of like people who are able to avoid the kind of like allure of attention. And you know, I think every writer, and probably it's the same in your industry and a lot of other kind of artistic industries, I think we all have a bit of like both of these things. You know, like we all want to be seen, we all want attention, but also, you know, I'm not sure what you're like, but I find attention kind of strange and disconcerting and like difficult as well. Like I find it produces a lot of anxiety. It's this strange paradox where you kind of want it, but like when you get it, it feels really strange. And, you know, it's this weird paradox where like writing is so private, like you're sitting there alone at your desk, just working by yourself. But like being a writer in this day and age, like it's very public. Like you're expected to be kind of like out there and talking about your work and being really kind of eloquent and being able to kind of sell yourself, which I think it's very strange. And I think it's very new. And yeah. And so to go back to kind of like honesty, I think similar to what we were saying before, it's about kind of like finding a way to be like honest in your work and honest to what you want your work to do. And like, I think what I've learned is just to like really enjoy making the work and kind of have a sense of like fun and exploration. And that feels more honest rather than kind of like thinking about how the work will be received and who will like it and whether it will be read or something like that. It's to kind of more enjoy the process of it. And I think that sense of fun kind of, hopefully it like transmits itself or something like that. But yeah.
Do you think that a lot of people, I'm going to use the word, a lot of creatives
yes,
are not honest about the success that they want and pretending that they don't want success is a self-preservation method, because if they don't get it, then they haven't failed in a way?
Totally. I think that is like it's so well put. I think ambition is like a dirty word, especially in Australia. I think it's like the tall poppy syndrome. It's the cultural cringe stuff. It's like we're taught that like you shouldn't be ambitious. You shouldn't kind of celebrate your successes. You should kind of be very humble and you should talk yourself down. And you should always be like, you know, if somebody pays you a compliment, you reject the compliment or whatever. And, you know, being humble is great. But I also think when you are ambitious and you pretend you're not, it kind of, again, makes you do weird stuff where you start kind of like, when you see ambition in other people, you start rejecting it and being resentful of it because like people think that if they can't express, because like if you write a book, of course you want people to read it, and that's good. You should want people to read it, but like admitting that isn't bad. I don't think anyway. And so yeah, I've definitely kind of seen this in a lot of writers who, you know, it'll even be like I'll have a lot of friends who like maybe they'll be working on a book for years and years and years, and they just can't let it go because they want it to be so perfect that they never let anybody else read it, and they're so worried about it not being like the perfect book, which like, you know, is going to win them the Nobel Prize, that nobody ever gets to read it, and it just kind of stays there. And I think that's this kind of, as you said, it's like this inability to kind of accept one's desire and ambition. And I think being honest about that is helpful and it's kind of healthy. Yeah, you don't have to be like a crazy fame monster or something like that, but like, you know, we should all want our work to kind of like be out in the world, I think, anyway.
Yeah, it's like, I think just backing your work and being like, I want recognition for my effort is very healthy. I've noticed the difference when I lived overseas. Like I didn't feel like I had to downplay anything. Even in the US, when I visited Lawrence many times, for people listening, that's my brother and he's a classical pianist, but he, I don't know, like I just noticed the women a lot more supportive of other women and they're like, you go girl, like vibes. And I was like, whoa, I'm not used to this. But also they'll be like, they will openly come up to you and be like, how they can help you. This is what I can do for you. And this is why I would be good at it. And they openly say it. And I was like, wow, So cool. I really like that approach.
Yeah, I really agree. I think you put that well there. Like America, especially, they're the complete opposite to Australians. I think who they kind of like,
Mm,
they want to make connections. They want to kind of like tell you about what their goals are and things like that. Sometimes
yeah.
to the opposite extent where you're like you want to talk about
Okay,
something
cool.
else other than the work and career and whatever. But like, yeah, I think there is something very Australian about that desire to kind of like minimize one's achievements and pretend that like
Yeah.
anything that you get was done without effort or just kind of
Mm,
happened or was an accident or it was just something that had nothing to do with you. It's very kind of I've talked about this a lot with other artists, which is like, I kind of think that artists should be more transparent about kind of like the finances of being an artist, because there's such big discrepancies between like, one book will get paid really well and one book will get paid very little. And like,
mm,
it's kind of, I think artists should be more like socialist about it. We should all be kind of like fighting for each other to kind of like help each other make sustainable and kind of like
yeah.
productive careers, rather than it being this kind of secret where everybody's gossiping about like, ooh, who got that much money? Is it actually true? Blah, 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 blah. I think it's kind of like something that we should all be kind of like invested in, which is creating a like ecosystem where people can actually thrive as artists.
So in your early days as an Australian creative, what were your biggest challenges when you moved overseas?
I guess like moving overseas, whether you're a creative or whoever you are, it's kind of challenging and exciting. So I lived in Berlin for a few years, and now I've been in Athens for probably 5-6 years, something like that. Learning a new language, being in this kind of unfamiliar territory, it's really disorientating, but it's also really inspiring. It's really fun. And when I moved to Athens with my partner, we like didn't really know anybody. And so I guess it makes you really receptive to kind of like meeting new people, trying new things, kind of having new experiences, because you have to, because like you don't have this like history with the city or the people in the city. So you have to kind of like make it for yourself. So it kind of makes you like very outgoing, and it makes you very kind of like in control of your experience in the city, because you kind of have to make it happen yourself. And going back to some of these things that we've been talking about, like one of the reasons we moved here was, my partner's a writer as well, and we really wanted to kind of take our art seriously. And I think, putting art at the center of your life, you have to kind of make sacrifices, and you have to kind of think about ways that you can kind of like create time and space to write. And I think living in Athens was one of those things, which is like, our money stretched a little bit further. We could kind of like disconnect from a writing scene and kind of like really drill down on like the work that we're making. It took a while, but we eventually kind of worked out how to kind of make it work. And eventually we started this reading series where we'd get together kind of like international writers and Greek writers and kind of like bring them together and try to kind of create, I don't know, like a bit of a writing community here, and then kind of give back to the city a little bit. And, that's kind of worked really well. And so I think there's like, it took us a while, but I think we've kind of finally found this like nice balance of like being able to concentrate on our work while also kind of like have this community of other people whose work inspires us, I guess.
Yeah, and I feel like, I don't know Athens very well, but it reminds me a little bit of Istanbul. It's like vibrant, so you can just step outside your door and immerse yourself and not feel like all you do is your work.
Yeah, I'm not sure what you're like, but certainly with writing, I think it's so important to kind of like make sure you're not just sitting at home all day working, because you can kind of like really disconnect yourself. You do need some measure of like solitude, but too much can kind of really push you into strange places. But one of the great things about Greece is like having a thriving social life is kind of like it's such an important thing here. Like whether you're a writer, whether you're like working at a supermarket, like anything, it doesn't matter. Everybody, like social lives are such a kind of like important part of like living here, and like spending time with friends and other people is like, it's so important. And it's something that's like, yeah, I really like. And I found it kind of quite different to Australia, where everybody's so kind of like focused on work and career that it's often really hard to find time to kind of socialize with your friends.
It's more
Whereas here,
private, I think.
yeah, it's more private. Everybody's living in houses, you know, it's more spread out. It's harder to get from place to place. It's such a big, Melbourne's such a big city. And so, yeah, there's kind of more opportunity for kind of like meeting people here, which is something that I think that kind of like is helpful for me as a writer, just because if not, I'd just be sitting in my writing studio all day.
And what are the people that you encounter day to day like? Just if you step outside of your building, what's a day in the life?
A day in the life. Yeah. Well, I'm not sure whether you can see, but I'm in a sling at the moment because I had a bit of a spill on my motorbike, so I broke my shoulder. Yes, my mother was right. I shouldn't have been riding my motorcycle. It's fine. It's nearly healed. I'll be out of the sling in a couple of days. But so my days are kind of like a bit different to what they normally are because I can't actually type. So I'm trying to kind of like be very slow and just read a lot and take some notes in my notebook. But like normally, if I'm like fit and firing, you know, kind of what would happen is, you know, I live in a very kind of dense neighborhood called Exarchia, which is kind of like traditionally the leftist neighborhood in Athens. And so, you know, there's people everywhere. And, you know, very quickly you kind of start knowing everybody, you know, all the people at the shops, you just see people on the streets. It's a really kind of like, it's a really nice neighborhood for just running into people. So that's a really nice part of my day. But basically, you know, I'll get up, I'll try to read in the morning when my kind of brain is fresh. I try to kind of read a few chapters, 50 pages of a book or something every day, just to kind of like keep that going. And then I'll go to my studio, which is I share with a few other artists kind of in the neighborhood. They're not writers, but like, you know, they're graphic designers, they're kind of visual artists. And that's been really good for me because I've always written kind of in a room by myself. And I've actually found I really like working in the same room as other people, just like having,
I like it too.
Yeah, it's so nice. You can kind of like have a little chat. You can kind of just talk like over kind of little creative problems you're having. And it feels like the work is kind of like coming from a few people rather than one person, which feels really nice. And so, I don't know, I try to spend a few hours every day writing. I don't get too like hung up about like word counts or page counts or time. I just kind of try to write something that I'm kind of like happy with every day. And sometimes it comes easily, sometimes it doesn't. But like over the years, I've kind of learned to trust that like it's not a day by day thing. It's like you look at it kind of over the course of months or even years, and the work comes, even if it doesn't come every day. I guess one thing I've found recently is like, you know, I'm in my 30s now, is like, I don't know, writing really takes a toll on the body. Like, you know, you get your RSI, you start getting weird back problems. So like I use a standing desk now, and I do like, you know, I've got my yoga mat and I do like lots of downward dogs, like every kind of like, you know, few minutes just to kind of like keep the body like nice and limber, because otherwise I think it doesn't seem physical, but writing is actually very physical, I find anyway. So, you know, that's one of the things I've learned in the last few years, is to try to like keep my body in good shape to kind of make, to make the work that I want.
Yeah, well, I mean, you're describing motherhood to me. I'm sore everywhere. And even Lawrence, he gets very sore playing the piano. Like, I feel like things you wouldn't expect make people sore.
Yeah.
What would your advice be to anyone who aspires to write professionally or just for themselves?
I would say, firstly, to just write about something that really interests you. Don't focus on what you think you should be writing, or what other people are writing, or what the market likes. Find like where the heat is in your kind of life. Like, what is kind of like, what are you kind of worried about? What kind of brings you joy? What kind of brings you terror? And like really kind of like focus on the thing that feels most important to you. And if you write about that, the work will probably be more interesting than if you write about something less kind of abstracted from your life. I don't know. I think the other piece of advice is just try to do it every day, even if it's not like for hours every day, even just 20 minutes a day. If you do that and you kind of really focus on it, over time it's like building a muscle, and over time it's gonna get longer. You're gonna get kind of like more confident in the work, and just kind of make some time in every day just to get a few words down, and you might be surprised what comes of it at the end.
Yeah, sounds good. And very last question, when is your book being released and where can people find it?
Well, it's out on April 30th, and you can pre-order it now from the Readings website, I believe, and it's being launched in Melbourne on the 1st of May at Readings in Carlton, and I'll be kind of touring around the country during May and June to promote it, so keep an eye out for it. And yeah, basically it's available for pre-order now, but yeah, it should be in all the major bookshops come May, which is exciting and terrifying.
This was the Cleopatra's Bling podcast with me, Olivia Cummings. Next time...
All around the world, India, South America, Russia, Canada, Australia, and of course South Africa. There aren't that many natural diamonds really when you consider what there could be and what the Earth could have produced.
Until then, stay curious.